Hi, part two of what I was saying this morning. You'll notice the weather's changed now. I don't know if you can hear the rain. And it's also later in the day, so you might be able to hear cars going past, but it's still not cold. And yes, the football table's still there. So I was talking about how I've built a life around the lifestyle rather than the work. And was kind of saying that I thought that people maybe in their 30s and kind of younger were looking more to doing that. And I suppose then I was musing as I was washing up, as you do, thinking, oh, I've probably done my Pollyanna bit, and kind of not talked about some of the difficulties with it. And so, as I was saying this morning, we're kind of schooled into linear progression, things growing, whether that's your career or the economy or getting more and more and more. And so there've definitely been downsides for me of not following that track. So one is kind of disapproval with a little bit of maybe disdain and ridicule from some people, particularly right at the beginning when I started doing it. So people who felt like I was wasting potential because I was working part-time and looking after children, or because I was doing freelance stuff, or because I was doing stuff that didn't earn money. So a lot of, I mentioned that I wrote a column for 2 years for an emotional literacy magazine for schools, and I didn't get paid for that. And so in the eyes of some people, there was quite a lot of judgment about why you're doing that. That's just a hobby. And of course, to some extent, that's true. It was just a hobby. It didn't pay the bills. But what it did do was give me the practice of writing regularly, which I definitely can see that I've built on. It developed some social contacts, one of whom remains a friend. And it gave me some kind of credence in that world, which is still the world that I'm in. And so one of the things with not prioritizing the linear progression, and I'm putting in with that the sense of more, greater, often status and money and power. So I definitely haven't followed that because I've diversified. And so that does mean that, had I progressed and gone on to be a head teacher or a deputy head teacher, I'd have a much bigger pension. Oh, can you hear me all right over the very hard rain? I'd have a much bigger pension. And there's definitely been times in my life where money's been tighter than if I'd followed those routes. And that's one way of accounting. But then when I look at, first of all, the experiences that I've had, the places that I've been, the people that I've worked with, it's been an incredibly rich experience. And very often, a lot of the stuff that I've done, even if there's no or very small financial rewards, there's other rewards that we just don't account for in our social system. So if you think back to when we were hunter-gatherers, which was the earliest form of human society, your survival depended on the tribe. And to be ostracized and outside the tribe meant almost certain extinction. And so we've been brought up with this Darwinian idea of the survival of the fittest, and it's very individualistic. But Darwin also wrote about cooperation, and you just have to look to bees, trees, I can't think of the name of those little fairy creatures that do that when they stand on their back legs. Can't think of it. It'll come to me. I want to say wildebeest, but it's not that. But they work as they keep lookout for each other. It's going to really irritate me. So they work cooperatively. So it's not cooperation or competition. It's both. But we've ignored in our societal story, we've ignored cooperation and collaboration. Some of the most amazing work experience that I've had have been collaborating with groups of diverse people to create something together. And I think I did get paid for some of that work, but oh my goodness, it was so exciting. It was exhilarating, creative, generative, to work with many, many different people. And I think that the linear progressive route means I have to beat you. I have to get more than you. I have to do it on my own. I have to stand out on my own. And that's, I suppose, fundamentally not how I see life. I suppose I see life, back to that metaphor from this morning of a web, that we're all connected. And so if I'm succeeding at somebody else's expense, then that makes the web weaker. And ultimately, that's a web that I'm within. And so just as we might, you know, I'm sure we've all seen it in the workplace, where it used to really bug me when I was at work and people would take credit for my ideas. I'd get really internally frustrated about thinking that was mine and I said that and they laughed at it and now they're using it. Because that was, I suppose, when I was younger and still wanting to be recognized as, you know, that's mine. And that, you know, I'm not saying that isn't irritating, and that's certainly nothing that I hope that you know, I think as an academic, I've always tried to reference people, and whether that's just someone that's given me an idea or someone that's an academic. But what that did was it weakened the network of that relationship. So it, for me, when someone does that, that just weakens my trust in them, and it weakens my trust in their integrity, because they're dissembling, you know, they've taken something which isn't theirs and they're trying to pass it off as theirs. So not only is that kind of dishonoring somebody else's input, but also it's a pretense. And so for me, that makes me step back. And so there's a weakening in that social fabric. And I think where I'm going with this is that actually you can see why people do that if they believe that there's a ladder that needs to be climbed and the winners are the ones that get to the top. And if you think about that, it's often presented as a pyramid, then only few people will get to the top. And that's what we see in the world, isn't it? We see some people, I can't remember the figures, but, you know, 1% of the world's population have all the wealth. And we can see how that doesn't work. We can, you know, we've looked at the Ukraine and people coming over from the Ukraine, but there's, you know, how long have there been refugees coming to these shores? We're talking about the cost of living crisis now and people not being able to afford food, but how long in England, a developed country, have there been people living on the streets and not being able to afford food? It's not new. And so that pyramid means there's winners and losers, and that you know, very few get to the very top. And so that can't, what that doesn't understand is that that can't be good for the whole web, because actually if you've got people who can't, if I couldn't afford to feed my kids, I'd do anything, you know. It's that I think it's the Kant was the one who said morals are absolute, and you know, they shouldn't differ in situations. And I think, yeah, but they do differ. You know, I wouldn't steal bread now, but if my children were starving, I'd steal bread. And so it's not good for the whole society. But if you think about not thinking about your life more as a designing your lifestyle and thinking about what's good for you and the web, then we're starting to get a more connected and sustainable way of living. Now that can be really tough because there is so much pressure to go up the hierarchy or to feel like you're somehow at the bottom of the hierarchy. And a big part of that, which makes me furious, is how caring work, particularly parenting, particularly, you know, it still is predominantly women, as we saw during the pandemic, it still is predominantly women that do most of the unpaid childcare. And because we value what has money attached to it, it means that we therefore don't value people that are maybe working part-time to be with their children or to be with their parents or to be with someone that's ill. We devalue that caring and we see them as lesser. And that's purely because we're looking through the lens of money. But if you think, I was talking to a young woman the other day who was feeling guilty because she was only working part-time with 2 young children. And I was like, really? So you just sit around and put your feet up the rest of the time? And she said, oh my, you know, going to work is having a break. And that's precisely because the rest of the time she's raising young children. And anyone that's ever done that knows how exhausting and relentless, as well as lovely and enriching it is. But it's not, sitting around drinking your favourite summer tipple. And if you think of the money, so she's not getting recognition because she's not getting money for that bit of her role. But if you think about the money she's saving the economy, if she does that job well enough. So, you know, good enough parenting means that your children are less likely to need medical care, not just when they're younger, but throughout their whole life, because you're going to prevent accidents, you're going to be, you know, there's less chance of obesity. That's what the data is saying. Your children that have got parents that they feel securely attached to, and I suppose I'm talking about good enough parenting, obviously not abusive parenting, but good enough parenting means that you're less likely to end up in the criminal justice system, you know, whether that's youth offending or police or prisons, and think about how much money that saves society then. Less likely to need social workers to be involved, youth workers, less likely to need special interventions in school. So all of these things cost money, and they only become visible when it's done badly, when children aren't given the safe and secure environment that they need to grow up in. Not the perfect environment, but a good enough environment, as Winnicott said. So, you know, one of the ways that we might start to value that is by attaching a value to parenting and giving, you know, people that stay at home to raise children money for doing that. So some countries are trialing the universal basic income. There's somewhere up in Canada that does it. In Wales, I love Wales, they try things out. In Wales, they're doing that at the moment with children who are care leavers, young people who are care leavers. And that's where you don't have to do anything to deserve a basic amount of money. It's not related to anything, you just given it. And what they found in the longer, where it's been running longer, it's only just started in Wales, is that if people think that people will just squander it and sit around and watch Netflix and drink a lot. But actually what they found is that it meant that parents stayed home with children, young people stayed in school and studied for longer, people learned crafts and trades and did more voluntary work. And so until we start to, and I think the change has to come kind of living your life according to your values and a lifestyle rather than a pre-planned path for yourself or pre-planned kind of work life for yourself, means that you have to be the agent that values yourself. And so what that means is, rather than, and I was that mother as well, I said, oh, I only work 3 days a week, to think, no, well, actually I work 3 days a week and then I have a full-time job as a mum. And to start to talk about ourselves differently, or, you know, I have a full-time job caring for my parent. So starting to think about that differently and starting to look at what really does value add. So, and not just value add to you and your bigger car, bigger house. I love that. Is it Talking Heads song about whose is this beautiful wife? How did I get here? You know, and that cliche, we don't take it with us. You might pass it on to your children if you're, you know, in that position. But let's not pretend that when, you know, if we think about the lives that our children and our grandchildren are facing, there's multiple crises ahead, aren't there? You know, we cannot hide from the climate crisis, and that, for me, and I think for anyone that you know, is without our ecosystems, we've got nothing, have we? You know, we need fresh air, we need fresh water, we need food. You know, having a big car pales into insignificance next to those things. And how are we best able to produce food? If you think about how food used to be produced and still is, you know, I live in an agricultural area. The farmers, yes, they've got their own tractors and they're, you know, they've got monocultures, but actually they work together. You know, the moment they were gathering in the hay, and they all do each other's fields. So John will go to Mike's field, and so will Bill and Ted, and then they all do that, and then they will move on to another field. So farming and food production has always been done collaboratively, collectively. You know, air and water are currently open source unless you buy bottled water, but are we going to get to the stage where our grandchildren are going to need to wear ventilators because air quality is not good enough? And I don't know whether you saw, I think it was only a year ago that there was a girl, the case was a year ago, but a young girl in London died because the air quality was so poor that she couldn't breathe. And it was the first case in England where it was recognised that the cause of death was poor air quality. And of course, that's in England. You know, anyone that's ever been to somewhere like Delhi, I remember getting off the plane in Delhi even 20 odd years ago and feeling dizzy for the first 2 days because it was the pollution. I just couldn't get enough oxygen and my lungs weren't used to it. And so it took a couple of days to acclimatise. And so we know that that's been problematic. So what I'm saying is, it's not always easy to step off this very powerful track of get more, do one thing, keep doing it all your life, and then retire. And, you know, then you get to do the things you want. You know, none of us, if COVID has shown us anything, none of us, there's no guarantees, is there, that we're going to get to retirement? And we probably all know people who didn't get to retirement. And so, you know, don't postpone living the life that you want in the pursuit of money, which which you're not taking with you, and even if you can pass it to your children, it's only going to go part the way. Now, obviously, the people with the money are going to fare better, but only up until a point. If there is no fresh air, so I also see living and designing a life and thinking about your life based on kind of what you want and what you need in a way that can change and adapt as you do. So I don't ever really intend to retire, but I suppose over time I've definitely changed the work that I do to suit the age that I am and the age that my children are. So it's been a long time since I taught year 9 because I had my own kids of a similar age, and it was just too much to have stroppy kids in both parts of my life. So I changed it. And I think it's just recognizing what we need and thinking that it's possible. I think so many people feel that it's not possible, but you know, the tides are turning. The pandemic has meant that people are asking for more flexible working and having to give it, you know, there is a employment crisis at the moment. Unemployment's very low, and although wages are, you know, being capped, there's still jobs out there where there is room for negotiation. And so I think there's, you know, it's up to us to think about what we want. And I suppose the final piece to this is well-being. So I suppose another reason that you know, it was for my children, it was wanting to be flexible, it was also I get bored doing one thing all the time, so wanting to be able to be all the bits of myself, not just one bit of myself, is well-being. And so I definitely, in my work life, have seen people who burn out, and I don't think that's an unusual thing. I'm probably most of us have seen that, and I did it. I had 7 weeks off work with stress when I was working a lot when my children were very young, and just I couldn't cope with it. It just was too much, and conflicting demands are one of the biggest causes of stress. So when you're being pulled in 2 directions, be a good mum, be a good worker, and they're in conflict, and that burnout, of course, that if you're then designing your life around your well-being, your family, your relationships, and what's good for the wider world, you know, and the generations hence, then actually that's also immediately looking after your well-being. So as I mentioned this morning, in the winter I was able to get outside in daylight every day because I could flex my work so that I could be, and that made, I used to, I think, definitely get a bit of SAD, you know, seasonal affective disorder, and I definitely have not had that since I've been able to be out all through the year in daylight. And it's such a simple thing that costs no money. It doesn't need any drugs. It just means that I need to adjust my life so that even in winter, whatever the weather, I can be outside for a bit, and it just makes all the difference. We know that cortisol levels drop when we're able to be in nature for even 20 minutes. So again, no therapy needed, no medicine needed, no intervention needed, no money needed, but time to be outside in nature. And prioritizing our well-being. Again, hopefully COVID's shown us that without that, we don't have anything. stress and cortisol really erodes our immunity. There's lots of research on that. Keycult Glaser looking at the white blood cells and the T cell counts. If you've got stress, your T cells and your killer cells, which are your immune cells, they just drop, and that's how you're more prone to illness as you get older, heart disease. And obviously, not all things, there's genes, but certainly stress never helps with well-being. And so I just wanted to make this second video because I think it's not easy, and I certainly, the costs have been that I haven't, that I've really pissed some people off, that people have seen that I've been a jack of all trades and master of none, and that people have seen that I'm not committed, and people have, that I'm not using full use of my talents, or people haven't understood why I don't have, the big flashy car. And so lots, there have been people that just don't get it, and I suppose that was painful at the time, but it's never stopped me doing it. And I get to kind of this time of my life, and I think actually I suppose I feel a bit of compassion for those people that didn't get it, because they're so locked into that paradigm of one job, work hard, get progression, earn money. That's and that I have no choice. And so I feel lucky that for whatever reason I've been able to diversify. So I don't know whether that's been rambling. Meerkats, they were the things, weren't they, that do that. So yeah, thank goodness I remember that before the end of the video. But yeah, so think about it, and think about what matters to you, what your values are, how you really want to live that boosts your well-being, and that also boosts or at least doesn't further erode the well-being of the planet, which is our life support system. We just can't avoid that anymore. Those conversations cannot be avoided. And I'm just about to make another video on cognitive dissonance, about that weird feeling that it's nothing that I can do to make a difference. So if that's of interest, pop over. Oh.